Welcome everybody. This is Red Mage. As I'm sure you saw the video from Cody here earlier. At this time, pretty much the schedules are not really working for us to continue doing the podcast, unfortunately. So instead, what I've started trying to do is put together little things, just as far as doing like playthroughs of some RPG Maker games that are out there. Now, one of the ones that I know that I've been promising for a while, and I'm sorry, Slaw, I really for how long it's taken me to get there, but is Celia's Quest. And now Celia's Quest is a little game that Slaw has put together, and the basic premise, from what I'm understanding of it, is you play a single character, and you kind of go on this adventure. So it's got difficulty settings, which is pretty cool. And I think for this playthrough, I went ahead and I just went with just a medium difficulty, not really bothering with anything too hardcore just for a playthrough. Don't want to go too easy because I didn't want it to be, too crazy on the first play. Now, I've got it running at 2 times speed, but this intro is still very, very fast. Basically, the premise is just that there's a fairy that finds this place, decides to make a valley, with all kinds of cool stuff in it, and that's fine. And then a short time later, this guy and his family kind of finds it, and they're like, "Ah, this is a good place to put a village." So they end up putting a village, and then at that point, basically the town just kind of flourishes from then on out. It's been the place of heroes, that kind of thing. Now, our story though has nothing to do with any of these heroes. We're actually looking at Celia, who, as you can see, is already is sleeping at the end of it. So from what we've got here so far, Celia is kind of a bookworm. From what we found, it's pretty straightforward. There's a lot of really good facial expressions that she's got. So I do commend the art on that. One other thing too to note is that Slaw painstakingly did everything that you can interact with, for the most part, has something there. And I do really like that because it kind of helps fill out the world a little bit. It kind of just shows your main character's thoughts on everything. Um, so in the intro here, I kind of did read through everything here for the intro. So there's not a whole lot here that's really needed as far as it's just as far as playthrough stuff. If you're playing the game, it's all very important, because there's all kinds of status effects and different stuff that happens in the game. And I went through and I read all of these. Now, it does a really good job of making those status effects relevant. I know we've had podcasts in the past that have kind of talked about the status effects and just how a lot of the times they may not always necessarily be useful. A lot of times you may not really even see the need for them, simply because just the way that the game goes, it's just more efficient just to hit them in the face with a spell or an attack or something like that. So the way that Celia's Quest handles it is basically, and we'll get into this too later on once we get into the battle system. But for the most part, you've got three different methods of attack. You've got speed-based, agility-based. I'm not sure. I remember what the stat is called right offhand, but basically it's rogue stuff, traps, and that sort of thing. Most of them have like a DOT or a delay or something along those lines. They're not just straight active damage. Um, Beyond that, you also have your strength score, which then determines your physical attacks. Now, that's all well and fine, but this game has a neat little mechanic where if you attack, then after like the next turn, you're exhausted. And so your attacks then at that point do less damage. So you can't just spam the attack button over and over again. I mean, you can, but you don't really get very far with it. Apparently you do. Talking to Slaw later on, apparently you can if you basically just level strength, but that's not really a way that I'm planning to play the game. So, and then the final one is just like your magic stuff. Magic is kind of has the highest damage potential, but of course, as per most magic, it's limited by a resource, which is per usual the MP. Now, the way that this game kind of sets it up is the way that you go about learning new skills and that kind of thing is train under who are called mentors. And we'll get to them here in a minute. But basically, they're effectively, as far as I've played so far, they basically just work like skill shops. Once you've reached a stat up in a certain requirement, then at that point they're open up to teach you a new skill. And that's pretty much all that they do as far as I know right now. And then also, there's not really a whole lot of items to begin with in the game, but you can pick up these craft kits that are out and about, which are just kind of laying usually in dungeons and that kind of places that aren't savory that most people would find. And supposedly, and I haven't gotten there yet because I died, and you'll see that here eventually. But the crafting kits you bring back to different merchants, basically whichever one you need to get an item for, so either armor or shield or weapon, that kind of thing. Bring them the craft kit, and they'll be able to craft like the next tier of their respective item. So again, the very base concept of the game is it takes kind of a lot of traditional stuff and turns it on its head. Because you can specialize, but the game kind of rewards you a little bit for being able to go out and about and do like a more varied role, which for me, as I'm sure you all know by my moniker, my little picture, so on and so forth, etc., as Red Magery goes, I like versatility. I like to have all that on there. So I'm planning to, as I get further into the game, to build Celia in that kind of more varied state. Now, as I'm sure you can see, and because this has been going on for a few minutes now, the introduction on this game, it's kind of front loaded, um, which is good. It's good and bad. On the bad side of things, the game takes a little while to get going. It's not. I don't want to say it's boring to start with because it's really not. Because all this information is really interesting to me because I really like battle systems. But in general, it's just there's a lot of reading to do just to get started. And while Celia might like reading a lot, players may not necessarily do so. But on the flip side of it, by front loading it, which is what I think was Slaw's intent, by putting everything there in the beginning, then at that point you no longer have to have things explained to you as you continue to play the game. And so I thought that was an interesting way to handle it. I'm not sure that I completely agree. I think that a lot of this could have been still given to the player at the beginning, but we could have also cut back a little bit on some of it, such as like the status effects don't really come into play, at least not for the first part. So we could have gone over the basics of the stats, the way the combat goes, that kind of thing, just with a book or two, less status effects for a later time. But at that point, I had read everything. There's some bottles that you grabbed which are important. I'm glad I did. And then at this point, you just you can explore around the house and just kind of see what's going on. So and here you kind of get the very idea of the opening plot basically. So Celia by her parents had basically been told that she was going to marry some guy. And so Celia, on the other hand, is absolutely against this idea, and so she decides to kind of do her own thing. Now, you can kind of get a good idea of just about the family members that Celia lives with, just by all the little stuff that you can find. I like that a lot of the paintings in here are just like it's a painting of some guy or some lady. Nobody really knows who. It's just kind of really weird to think about that. That you've got paintings in your house, you're not really sure who they are. But anyway, um, but yeah, you have two older brothers, and the way that you kind of get a little handle on them is just one of them. I'm sure Michelle is extremely messy, kind of dirty, gross. The other one's like a huge romantic. Um, and then here Celia's talking with her folks, just wanting to, just gonna see what's going on, and wants to talk to them about her eventual leaving, which she's not, really thinking is gonna go very well. Now, your dad, on the other hand, he likes corn. He likes corn a lot, especially all's corn. That makes him probably the best dad in any RPG that I've seen in a while. But so after you talk to both, it cuts to a quick cut scene, and she kind of just basically says straight up that she's leaving. She's gonna go be an adventurer. She doesn't want to marry whatever that guy's name is. Apparently he's not somebody that she has any real connection with, and so her parents, try a little bit to try to get her to stay, but no, eventually she decides just that she's going to go ahead and leave. Um, I would have liked to see at least kind of like a moniker of which one was talking. It's usually pretty easy to pick up between the two who is actually talking, but there's a couple times in there where it's hard to say whether it's mom or the dad talking. Here, you can kind of go and talk to both of your brothers. Now, this is your eldest brother, the romantic. Apparently, and at this point, you find out that Celia's already told both of her brothers that she's going to be going, that she really does not want to stick around any longer than she has to, so she, doesn't have to marry anybody. Um, and so this is the younger brother who's kind of the dirty, sloppy, disgusting one. So he's kind of gross, as you can set, as you can see. But yeah, she basically, tells him the same thing that she's leaving. He's pretty cool with it too, and you just kind of do your little thing. Cedric, that's his name, is the guy that she's supposed to marry. None of them seem to really like him all that much, except for her parents, and even then, it seems to be more of like a political, movement marriage. Um, so after talking with both of her siblings, you basically just decide that you're going to go. Um, Now, there's not really any kind of note of any time skip here, but after leaving, you start camping out outside, and somebody had stepped on your toes to wake you up. And so, and when you're like talking back and forth with this lady right here, you find out that she happens to be like the princess. um, Also has a lot of good reactions and with everything. And so she's pretty spunky, tomboyish, from what it seems like. She's running from her parents as well. They're basically just kind of making their way through town. But the town, by the way, is called Villageville, if you missed that. Um, and so she's just kind of trying to get out from under her parents' thumb, run out and do an adventure, just kind of do her own thing, much like Celia is, and she kind of identifies pretty well with the princess. Um, Here, then you come under verbal assault by some ruffians who are basically trying to play off like they're not bad guys, but it's pretty obvious that they are, and it's not very long before they get taken. And Jean or Jane, I'm not sure how it's pronounced. The princess gets taken, you get knocked out, and then you get woken up by this creepy looking old guy. He's a pretty cool dude. He's basically the sword master, so he's the one who will teach you all of the sword techniques in the game. He comes into play later once you've gotten to that point. As of right now, there's not really a whole lot going on with this. Now, you do find out here too, while Celia is talking to nobody, that there's some kind of extra head voice that she has now all of a sudden, and there's not really any kind of explanation for it. Whoever the voice is, Celia can hear it, nobody else can, but when she tries to talk back, everybody can hear her, which kind of makes it a little funny in the back and forth when she's trying to explain to people what's going on, that she's got some other voice that she's talking to. And so at this point, this is finally here at this, where I double speed read about 14 minutes. So we're almost, if you check everything and read everything and then comment on it like I'd done originally, you got about 20-30 minutes before you're actually in control of the game, which feels a little bit long to me. I mean, the story progresses pretty quickly, and the humor that's in there, I haven't touched on that, which I'll get to once we get into some other stuff. But the humor that's there is pretty good. It keeps the conversation light and flowing without you having to, I guess, worry about it. Now, the barrels you can all break, and there's some stuff in there in some of the barrels, which is pretty cool. I mean, it's pretty standard RPG fare. I'm not sure if anybody at a later time is gonna, talk down to me for breaking all of these barrels. So there's that. Now there's a couple people just around the city, like the guy that I'd spoken to before, he's a stat trainer. So he is the one who would increase Celia's strength, which would then allow her, presumably, to equip better weapons, that kind of thing. So you also find out from the old guy, which leads you to this dude here, who's this shady-looking fellow, or no, you find out from the fairy, that's right, that, I spoiled that, you'll get to that later. Anyway, find out that he stole some of those 2 bottles that we had grabbed in the beginning of the game. So he's basically the next step of plot in order to continue. So Celia basically agrees at this point to go and steal something from a store in order to prove that she's just as stealthy as she looks. Now she's got 1 point in every stat, so she's not exceedingly stealthy. And at this point, I wasn't sure if that was the shop or not. It turns out it was. It's the only one in the basement, but I figured I'd go ahead and look around anyway, just to see what else is in the town. Um, and as you guys may have noticed just from running and looking around, a lot of these stores don't have anything in them, and that comes back to those craft kits that we were talking about before. And so with the craft kits, when you find them, presumably you'll have then items that you can purchase, use, that sort of thing on there. Now, basically go ahead here, and rather than just go ahead and steal something, I went ahead and talked to the shopkeeper, and Celia's pretty straight up front with it, and thankfully the store manager's a pretty cool lady. She's like, yeah, you can go ahead and just take something, that's fine, I don't care. And then as you're coming around, right here, we get introduced to yet another character, who is a talking mouth in a jar. So now at this point, you've got Celia, this head voice that she's got, which I spoiled was a fairy, who is now revealed here, and this other mouth in a jar. Now, the mouth apparently was some major spellcaster of some repute at one point or another, and has since been basically beaten and cursed, and then at that point put into a jar. Presumably his other body parts are around. Now, Celia can't deal with that, so she puts a little face in the jar. It's cute. I like it. It's very Celia. You'll kind of get as you play through the game that she's very, she's quirky in a good way, and it really shows in a lot of the writing that was done that Slaw took a lot of time to really kind of give her her own unique personality. She's kind of headstrong. She likes to have fun. She likes to do her own thing. She doesn't like anybody else telling her what to do. But at the same time, she still kind of needs that support from everybody else. So from this mouth in a jar, like I said, was a former caster, decides to teach Celia a little bit on how to cast spells. So he calls it the shock arc. It's basically just a real basic lightning spell. But Celia has basically dubbed it instead the disappointing spark. And that kind of becomes a running gag with her as well. Pretty much everything that is taught to her, at least from what I've seen so far, from one person or another, she decides to put her own little spin on. She gives it her own name, gives it her own little description, and that kind of thing. So that's it. Doesn't really take what's given to her and runs with it. She's got to put her own spin on it. So you end up finding rather a broken flask, and that's what you bring up as asking if you can steal it. And the shopkeeper is basically just like, yeah, go ahead, it's broken anyway. Now I have more room to throw away other broken things. So she doesn't really care. And then at this point, you also get the ability to talk to your little fairy friend, who's really creepy looking and also a huge egomaniac. But you find out from them that you basically, once you kill monsters, you can take their tears, which then the fairy then will use as currency to heal you. Now with this fellow, he tried to teach her the sticky bomb. Celia thought it was pretty gross and instead calls it the icky bomb. Okay, so that's again kind of how she rolls. You find out that the shady character is also named Shade, appropriately enough. And so he teaches you all the different bomb skills, which you don't have any skill points to start with. So, and you can't really build any rapport with anybody at this point because you simply just, you don't have any stats. Everybody kind of thinks you're pretty basic. You don't really have anything here. Um, so the way that Disappointing Spark works too, which is interesting, is when you use it, the enemy that gets hit with this, it also becomes charged. And then while charged, they take additional damage, but then it consumes the charge that's on them. So if you spam it over and over again, you'll do a little bit of damage and then more, and then just kind of oscillate back and forth. And you'll kind of see what I mean once I get to later on, where it really almost isn't all that worthwhile early on. But talking to Slaw about it, he kind of let me know that if you do invest points into intelligence, that obviously it gets stronger, but it definitely well outbeats your basic attack. So at this point, now there's this guy here that I completely forgot about. So he apparently had lost something. It's a little side quest that I missed, which apparently I shouldn't have because it makes the rest of the game a little bit easier, and and I'll cover that in the next video. But basically, the one that he does gives you one of the things that allows you to get a stat point, so that will eventually then come in handy to make the first dungeon easier, which we'll get to here in a moment. This is like a little rest area. The doors don't work at all, so I was a little disappointed there. But it's basically a place where you can heal and rest and then refill your potion bottles, which are about your only form of healing while you're out in the field. Now, the old dude gives you a sword, and as soon as he does, Celia's sprite updates, so you do wear a sword at that point. Now, it is a pretty sword, however, if you notice in the stat screen, you still only have punch. So despite having the sword, Celia still punches people in the face. She doesn't actually use it. I guess she thinks it's too pretty. So here I was kind of looking around to see what was going on. We get into the first battle. Okay, so this is where the battle starts to kind of go on. And so you can see to start with, you basically choose whether you want to attack, use your thief type abilities or use your magic type abilities. Now, I forgot to mention this earlier. Each of the stats kind of triggers the defense from the other. So the more physically fit you are, so the stronger you are, the more you resist magic, which is nice. But then you have like no resistance to speed. Speed then lowers your or increases rather your resistance to physical attacks, and then magic increases your resistance to the special attacks from like the thief types. So this guy here, as you can see, because I'm using the bolt over and over again, and it does 2, and then 1, and then 2, and then 1 as the guy becomes charged and not charged. And I was trying to really work with the exhaustion tactic that I had mentioned before, where basically when you use the physical attack after the next one is weakened. But at this early part of the game, all of your attacks seem to deal 2 damage. Now, the other interesting thing about this, which is different than most other RPGs, is that there's no experience for fighting enemies. So if you fight them and you beat them, you don't really get anything besides their tears. So it really doesn't behoove you, for the most part, to fight against monsters unless you've got the healing on standby to continue plowing through them. Fighting them over and over again really doesn't do much. Now there, I was trying to, because I realized that, and then the monster had noticed me, and so I was trying to do my best to avoid a second combat before I get back to town. Now, the way that the monsters work is they usually come in one of 3 varieties, at least that's what I've seen so far, which are the strong types, the thiefy types, and the magical types. So you have to then use Celia's basic judgment about how they look to then determine what kind of attack you want to use against them. So, for example, on this guy where it keeps showing blocked, because he is a physical type, we said physical types are more resistant to magical damage. So he just basically soaks all that magical damage and doesn't take any of it. Now see, at this point is where I went back and chose to heal after talking to them, because I didn't know if I got any skill points or anything like that from fighting. Turns out I did not. And here is where the sword guy is trying to teach you this double strike attack. and he's trying to explain that it doesn't really matter what the attack is called, that it's just that's just how the attack works is what it is, and Celia ends up giving it her own name. Of course, I can't learn it yet because I don't have a skill token. But here, went back and rested, and at this point, I should have gone back left to that river fork to explore that way. Instead, I went north to this old lady's house, which I was just kind of looking around to see what was here, and there were these little black-looking flame monsters instead of the red ones. So I wasn't really sure what they were all about. I end up fighting one right here, I think. Yeah, I go ahead and I save it. Yeah, okay. And then I end up fighting against one of these guys. Same basic deal. They're not mushrooms, but you've got brutal, which are the strength based, and then cunning, which are the speed based. So same kind of deal that it's always been. The enemies, like I said, come in these varieties, and which is good because it adds some skill to the combat, because you can't just use the same types of attacks against the enemies, because they're gonna be different than for you. Um, and so I tried to basically just determine what's the best way to work with stuff. So the sticky bomb, or the icky bomb, as Celia calls it, what it does is, in all, as well as being a delayed damage attack, which does a lot of damage. It also lowers the attack power of whoever has it. So you can use it on those that are going to do more physical damage to you, to try and stop them from dealing all that much damage. Um, which is a neat little way to kind of debuff the enemies and keep going forward with it. So each of the abilities has their own merits aside from just damage, which is really really cool. Um, Here, and a lot of the areas have like their little splash arts, as I'm sure you saw there. Now these little guys are little pumpklings. I kept calling them pumpkins when I was playing, but no, pumpkling, and they come in the same types of varieties that the other ones do. But at this point, I was starting to discover that the disappointing spark was in fact incredibly disappointing, and not really worth the effort, just because you can you can attack just with your basic attack, exhaustion or no, for more damage than the disappointing spark does. So that may be something that if Slaver goes around to update the game, that might be a neat little thing that he does. Now all the stumps here all have little bits of dialogue, and I wasn't really sure why, um, which is interesting. And there's it kind of gives you an indication that perhaps something might be happening in the future with these stumps, and something will, and you'll see it here in a little bit. But as far as the combat goes, there's really not a lot to it that I haven't already covered. So you're gonna get to see a lot of combat, while I'm just kind of talk about some other parts of the game that I enjoyed. Um, as I had mentioned before, the comedy aspect of the game is pretty top notch. The It's not overt, it's not in your face. It's just enough to really kind of give you like the hint that what kind of person Celia is, and it works really well. She, again, like I said, she's just kind of a fun-loving, happy-go-lucky kind of girl that just kind of does her own thing, kind of without regard to what other people say and do. And now throughout this dungeon too, to kind of cut back, because I've touched a couple of these boxes now, they, they're filled with ruined gloves, and you're not really sure what that is or what that means. Yeah, now that stump right there doesn't have anything, and that freaked me out. All right, so I'll let you know. But coming back up here, you then fight a stump, and so you fight this very angry stump. Um, and now, what's interesting about the stumps and how they work is they do a lot of damage. They're definitely by far one of the strongest enemies you fight up until that point, but they seem to they lose 10 health every round, so you can kind of wait them out and just kind of beat them down that way. Now, the problem is when you get in groups like this, because do you want to burn down the stump right away because he does the most damage, even though he's, still dying himself, or do you focus on another enemy and let his damage kind of come down on its own, and just from the 10 damage that he takes every single round? It's kind of a hard choice to come up with. But eventually, most of the time, I just kind of burned them down because they did so much damage compared to everything else. Um, but as far as the, going back to like the humor and the talking and that kind of thing, there's just a little bit enough in each dialogue to kind of get the sense of her character. And it's not done in a way, again, that's overt. It's not in your face. It's not anything that really causes you to, you know, to not like the character. It's very small. It's very subtle, I would say, in how it works. Um, Now at this point, you know, you you know, this is pretty much the end of the dungeon where you've kind of cleaned out everything there. But now you realize that you have to go down, and now you find some worn gloves to climb this thorny branch down into the second part of the dungeon. Um, and this is where I started to kind of realize that things were going to get a little bit more hectic than I was really prepared for. And that's kind of the interesting thing too, is that a lot of the game, as difficult as it is, and I was talking to Slaw about this as well, but as hard as the game becomes with these kinds of dungeons where you have limited resources and you only have so much to kind of get through, a lot of it just comes down to how prepared you were. Um, if you fall and you die, which I did, it's coming up here soon. It's you recognize it as, oh, this was my fault. I should have prepared better. You don't ever feel like the game's screwing you out of survival or anything like that. You pretty much know it's all on you each and every time. Now the only real complaint I have about the battles, especially early on, is they get while the difference in stuff, and this is the battle where I die. Because I thought about healing and then I was like, nah, I'll be fine. I can take one more fight. Turns out I couldn't. but but just the way that it goes is, like I said, they're not really repetitive per se, but you only have so many limited options at the beginning that it makes it difficult to be able to fight effectively against large groups of enemies like this. There's just not really much that you can do, and then there's where I died. And so wasn't really expecting that to happen, but it did, and so again, it just kind of comes back to I really wasn't prepared at that point for what was coming next. So in my next attempt, the next video, I'm going to pick up from where I left off at that point, because what I want to do is just go back through it real quick, just kind of show you guys where I was at, and then be able to continue onward from there. Because the way that the battle systems worked out, it's a lot of fun. I need to go and get that skill point, and I'm probably going to end up having that be where the next video picks up, is me going to get that other skill point or stat point, whatever it is, just to be able to be a little more effective in combat, because as it stands at level 1 with nothing, going through that dungeon is pretty rough. But other than that, the game so far is extremely enjoyable. I do really recommend it if you guys haven't picked it up. It's on Steam. Like most RPG Maker games, it goes on sale pretty regularly. I would definitely go through and pick it up. I will leave another review here shortly. More than likely, once I get a little bit further in, you can expect that probably next week, I would say. Hopefully, it doesn't take me longer than that, like this one did. But other than that, give it my recommendation so far. I will continue playing. I will have more videos. Once I beat Celia's Quest, I'll probably move on to some other game. I might check out Dashboard. I was one of the folks that when Carb was dropping it really early on in chat, on RPGMG. I was one of the ones that kind of helped him with a lot of the early stuff, like the weird car glitches and that kind of thing. I know a lot of other folks, gave him a lot of feedback too, which is awesome. So I'm really curious now to see what that final product looks like. I know he's been updating it a lot. So once I do hear Celia's Quest, then yeah, the next goal is Dashboard. After that, the floor's pretty much open. And if people like these, then I might take requests, or I'll just kind of go through my Steam library, because I have a lot of games. But either way, again, this was Red Mage. It was great getting to do a video again for you guys of some kind. Hopefully y'all enjoyed it. Let me know on that, you guys have a great next rest of your day, and I will see you in the next video. See you later.